You don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Dead up perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look up better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the first part of What If Deku Enters Young Justice. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of SojiroxTenken on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. It's easy to say, and one of the truest known facts of the universe, that an origin is a very unique and precious thing. Whether that origin belongs to a person, a place, or even a simple thing, an origin, how something came to be, is massively important even for the things that are basic and seemingly insignificant. It's quite obvious and most wouldn't need to be told that, but in talking about origins and how unique they are, perhaps you'd like to hear about one Jackson Allen. Well, before we begin you should know that it's definitely a different kind of story. To be clear, it's a heck of a tale, and sometimes it comes off as hard to believe. For none more so than our young protagonist, and he's the one who's lived it. This is the story of how an unassuming and seemingly not so special person became the strongest hero of Earth. But before we go any further though, I think the most important thing any one of us can ask of ourselves is this. If you had just lost everything, and I do mean everything, would you still want to be, or even have the capacity to be able to be a hero? Jackson Allen had had a fairly interesting life thus far, and the amount of pain he found himself in was at the moment a very major part of it. And through the haze and fog of said pain he found himself pondering. When and where am I? Pain. A kind of mind-numbing, ear-ringing, and quite frankly soul-shaking pain that he'd never felt before in his life. He'd felt pain before, and he knew for a fact that the age-old question always comes up, who hasn't? But this was different. Being human is pretty trash kind of deal when you think about it, and it's bad enough when you've been having a bad couple of weeks. Hell, just a bad year in general. The pain that was as of the moment racking Jack to his very core was something he was honestly beginning to believe he wouldn't be able to overcome. Anxiety is a pretty normal thing for most, though precious few would ever be able to tell you that someone like Jack had it. At that very moment Jack would have been mercilessly gripped by it if not for the ever-present pain. Waking up somewhere when you have no idea where that place is with your head splitting like you've either just been in a knockdown drag-out brawl or are nursing the mother of all hangovers is not the way that anybody likes to wake up. The first thing that Jack can truly feel when the pain starts to recede is the sand. He's laying in it, and it's coating parts of his exposed skin. Let anybody with even a modicum of the kind of sensory issues that Jack had tried to tell you the first thing that comes up when having sand on you, and the predictable thing that they'll say. I'm itchy. Lovely Jackson thought slightly sarcastically, as he did his best to try and orient himself. One of the most annoying feelings besides pain, and that's the feeling that assaulted Jack's frazzled senses as he finally brought himself to consciousness. The massive irritation mixing right along with the last dull throbs that came with the recession of the newest and most intense kind of pain he'd ever experienced. Jack blinked his eyes open for the first time and started to take stock of the situation, and once he got himself together, he found himself completely confuzzled. Yeah, let's go with that. Damn early childhood impressions, damn cat dog, Jack thought as he fully sat up on the beach he now found himself on. Jack shook his head briefly to stop himself from going off onto a weird tangent with his thoughts, knowing that he needed to reassess. Taking a closer look around, Jack realizes that he has a vague idea of where he is at the moment as he takes a cursory look around with his now fully clear vision. Jack finally gets his feet underneath himself, and once he feels right, he leans upwards to his full height, now focusing his mind on taking in as many details of the area that he now found himself in. How in the hell did I get here? The buildings are easy to spot from his position, and are tall even into the distance. The night sky is black as all get out, which would have been driving him nuts if it weren't for all of the garish neon-colored lights spilling onto the sand of the beach from the boardwalk just nearby. The wind picks up for a moment, and the smell, believe it or not, comforts Jack for just the smallest of moments because it would always be familiar, the smell causing him to unconsciously close his eyes while taking a deep breath to center himself. Memories from his youth on vacation with his family when they did that sort of thing, to his time in the service, the sea air had always been pretty much associated with nothing but good memories, though there were a few standouts amongst the plethora of them. Arcade games, beach days, boardwalk food, fudge, and those were only from his time being a young kid. Once Jack considered his more recent memories, the smell of the salt air reminds him of traveling the world with the Coast Guard, and all the ports of call he had gotten to hang out at and explore. Snapping himself out of the disoriented reflection his brain tried to go on, Jack turned his focus to himself and automatically noticed a significant difference. What the hell? What happened to my clothes? Jack thought, as he realized that he quickly needed to reach down and snatch his shorts up slightly as they started to drift south. Jack took a moment again to take a deep breath, the weirdness of the situation threatening to overwhelm his mind. I know these are the clothes I went to bed in. I know I went to sleep in my house. What the F? What is going on? Jack thinks before taking another moment to try and calm himself. Okay? Stop. I'm freaking out. That's not gonna help me. I know for a fact that I went to bed. I was planning for my move up to Nantucket Mall. I got tired from all the packing and planning, and laid down around 9:30 after saying goodnight to my Marnie, Damien, and Hercules the dog. So, what in the hell is going on here? Is this a dream? The wind picked up a bit, and as it slightly buffered Jack, he did his best to continue to mull everything over and try to rationalize what was happening. Okay, I know what this is, Jack thinks to himself after gazing at the glowing skyscrapers for another moment. Vivid lucid dreaming again, no big, happens to everybody once in a while. Except, I'm kind of cold and usually sensory things like touch and temperature either jolt someone awake, or it keeps them half asleep awake anyway, so I couldn't possibly just be someplace else like this out of the blue, no matter how heavy a sleeper I am. Jack thought to himself as he began to shuffle back and forth on his feet before then starting to pace in a small circle in the sand. Let it be known that Jack often had a bad habit of pacing when thinking, or if he was feeling at all bothered. Nervous energy was a thing for him. It was taking a firm hold of him now. Deep breaths, let's take it slow, Jack. Jack starts to look around and take in his surroundings even as he tries to cover himself more with his now too big 2XL bright red nightshirt, his jet black basketball shorts slightly sliding down his backside, exposing his black boxer briefs as he takes a few tentative steps. Realizing that they are too open and will just continue to annoy and hinder him, Jack takes a deep breath and then readjusts his shorts bungee strap so they stop falling, as he then proceeds to wrap his arms around himself again to ward off the slight chill in the air. Jack reaches with his left thumb to rub his wedding ring as he normally would when he couldn't cease his thoughts, and that's where he realizes that he doesn't have his ring on his hand, whereby he immediately turns to the spot he'd been laying to look for it. Jack stops moving for a moment to focus on the spot where he had been laying, finding his own body's slight indent in the sand, trying to look for the white gold comfort fit plain wedding band that he'd now had for 12 years, hoping to all that it is there. After all, what a slap in the face it would be if I lost it. Marnie would kill me. He barely finds it in the sand, but upon doing so is able to take a deep breath and relax some. Unfortunately, that feeling of being able to relax barely lasts a second, because once he tries to put the ring on, he realizes there's a huge difference. The ring that was slightly snug when he had gone to sleep now slides right on and off easily. Jack knows logically that he's not really fat per se, but most definitely hadn't felt no resistance from the band since he had first gotten the ring when him and Marnie had exchanged their vows way back when. That's when it hit him. Now the changes have become glaringly obvious, and with them the worry that he'd felt is now accompanied by confusion. He feels shorter than 6'2", and he most definitely feels and now looks lighter as he slightly lifts the hem of his shirt to see his now pronounced V-line along his torso. I haven't seen that since 10th grade. What the fresh hell is this? Jack thought as he was now worryingly rubbing his head only to stop and realize the huge difference. His hair had been cut short and cropped in a flat top style, But as it was now, he could actually run his fingers through solid locks of dark brown hair that now reached slightly past his ears on the sides, leaving him with slight bangs in the front. Let it be known that Jack had been decently athletic through middle and high school because of bike riding, track, and getting his brown belt in taekwondo before having to leave the school because his dad couldn't afford it anymore. He had never been the most muscular guy, since he had only been doing body weight exercises and hadn't picked up a pair of weights until well into his 20s after joining the Guard, but he knew for a fact that he had at least been passable with his physical fitness through most of his life. Okay, get a grip, Jack. Longer hair? You're thinner. I feel like I'm 14, maybe 15. Gotta be somewhere in my teens. But this is crazy. There's no way. This is a really weird dream, Jack mumbled out to himself as he began to pace again. The anxiety definitely starting to mount now, causing his stomach to gurgle. Now the important thing to do is wake up. Easy peasy, Jack thought, doing his best not to lose his marbles over the situation. How to go about doing this without looking like a psycho, Jack thought. No matter how you try to rationalize something like this, sometimes you just have to make a move and go for it. So, Jack did just that in his attempts to wake himself up. Okay, easy enough. The pinching trick always works. So, Jack pinched his left forearm and lo and behold, he could definitely feel it as he'd applied a decent amount of pressure. So that really only left one test to try in his mind before he would officially believe he was headed towards Crazy Town. Jack took a few deep breaths, threw up his arms, and simply tilted back as if going ahead with a trust fall and allowed himself to plop down into the sand on his back. As the man once said, ladies and gentlemen, we have just lost cabin pressure. Jack mumbled to himself out loud, reasoning that using the trick from Inception should have woken him up, which could mean only one thing. What the F? What the actual F? Everyone has that moment where something bad or completely ridiculous has happened in their life, and you want to know that you're not crazy for having been a part of it, but at the same time you know it's true, and you're just trying to reboot your brain to the new reality you're in. Jack laid there for what felt like a good few minutes. He kept trying to will himself awake at home in bed with his wife, at home safe where his family was. But all he got when he opened his eyes again was that infuriating night sky and the dancing colors of the signs from the hotels and stands up on the boardwalk. Finally deciding that he'd had enough pussyfooting around, he tentatively stood up and looked out towards the sound of where the ocean would be, and once he looked forward, Jack took in the sight of another big surprise. How did I completely miss this person just laying what has to be only about 50 or so feet from me on the beach with a little bit of smoke wafting off of them? Jack thought as he stood frozen in place. The smart thing would have been to walk away. Somehow Jack knew if he did that, he'd regret it. Let it not be said that Jack is a bad guy, because he's not. But he had been burned before, and the whole situation felt insane and really suspicious. All of it panning out in his mind to be some kind of setup. Jack was still very much in the process of denying that any of what was happening was even real. But at the same time, for the life of him, he just couldn't turn away. So, Jack did the only thing he could figure to after a moment of mulling it around in his chromies domies, and to the complete and utter shock of himself, he took a small step toward the downed person, even though he felt that doing so was a horrible idea. Years later, Jack would look back and laugh on the moment many a times, realizing that had he not done it, his life would have been irrevocably different. Yet after making the first step, Jack found he couldn't move. There was still such a sense of foreboding and apprehension about the whole thing. Anytime now Bud, Jack thought to himself, trying to just force himself to do something instead of standing there like a maroon. Help. It was faint and slightly strangled, but Jack had heard it. And that was all it took. Now he was moving forward, and 3 years' worth of BDS training, battle dressing station, was taking control. Jack cleared the distance and was now standing before the person, only to realize that it wasn't just a person, but a massive person. And not just a massive person, but someone that he could clearly recognize, though even with that, he still couldn't believe what and who he was looking at. This isn't possible, right? The costume the man wore was torn in places, and a clearly half-ripped worn, almost completely shredded red inlaid blue cape was underneath him. The man's long yellow hair was caked with red in spots, and he had little cuts marring his face on both sides, including around his slightly sunken-in eyes, that even now gleamed with a slight light, showing them to be an almost electric blue. Patches were torn out of the predominantly blue bodysuit he wore, while only his right side showed the intact descending jagged lines of red and white outlining. The man's left side looked horrible, almost like he had two massive holes where his lower chest and the beginning of where his stomach would be. His right hand looked almost charred black up to the elbow, and the left hand slightly past the wrist was the same, and that was where Jack could clearly see what looked like a half of a silver vambrace, that little bit being what was left of the accessory. Jack had to shake the shock of not only who he believed this to be, but the severity of the wounds. The training, he had only said what to do, and he had never seen anything this bad up close on a person before. Jack felt bile rushing up his throat, but quickly shoved the feeling of sickness down, took 2 deep breaths, and then grabbed what part of the cape was on the man, but not on the wound, and at one of the ripped seams started to rip at it so he could use it to try and fill cover one of the wounds. In that moment, it struck Jack like a bolt of lightning. It didn't matter if he kept it together, which he was barely doing. This man was going to die, and there was nothing he was going to be able to do to stop it. Jack was slowly falling into a deep pit of despair in his own mind when he felt it. The man had grabbed him, albeit weakly, but nonetheless had grabbed his right hand with his trembling left one. "Do you understand me?" Yes. The answer had come so quick he actually screamed and immediately clamped over his own mouth because of the volume. "Good. I cough don't have long." The man was fading. He and Jack both knew it. "I can call someone, get help. Let me," Jack said as he went to move, but the grip on his right hand became desperate. The man looked at Jack then. He really looked at him, and Jack knew he was judging his worth, his value, his ability. I'm begging, please cough, take this." His right hand came up to his hair with a strength and speed Jack didn't believe the hero could possibly have right now, and he plucked one hair from his head. "Eat this, cough, and inherit my power." The look he was giving, the tone, everything from that moment would be burned in Jack's mind forever. He knew he didn't have long, and he knew that he'd be gone in moments. Jack felt completely unworthy. This man asking this of him, this was All Might, Toshinori Yagi, the #1 hero in the My Hero Academia universe, the holder of probably the greatest quirk superpower ever, one for all. A stockpile of unimaginable power that had been built up and preserved from hero to hero, being used to stand against the tyranny and evil of all for one of the only villains that, if Jack was being honest, terrified the hell out of him. All for one could literally steal other people's powers and either keep them or give them to someone of his choosing, or even activate them through his own force of will. The man was an absolute powerhouse, having stolen an innumerable number of quirks through history. But what truly set the man apart was an even simpler fact. The man was pure evil. He believed himself a god and believed that he should rule over all of society with his power, and had done so successfully for a time. And now, his enemy, one of the greatest heroes in all of fiction, was somehow right now laying before Jack, bleeding out, and he was offering his power to him, to an absolute nobody like him. But wait, what about Izuku? What about All Might's Earth? All Might looks young. Is All for One here? Is anyone else seeing this? Jack thought frantically as his mind started to reel. This is insane. I can't do this. I could never be worthy of this. This pressure is too much. What do I do? Jack thought as he continued to have a mini freak out in his head. The feeling in that moment was crushing. The feeling of being useless, and the feeling of the complete lack of faith in himself to ever be worthy of the offer left Jack feeling numb. Let it not be said that he wasn't an introspective guy, because he often would look inward, to be honest, sometimes too much. Am I a good dad? Am I a good husband? Am I a good son? Will I ever be good enough? People deal with depression and anxiety all the time. It's safe to say that most can conquer it. In this moment, Jack didn't feel like he ever would, and he felt like all the doubt would swallow him. How did I get here? Where is here, really? When is now? What do I do? All the questions, all the doubts. Please cough be before I'm gone. And that was all it took. The doubt dissolved, and in its place a fire bloomed. Jack wouldn't let the man down. He wouldn't. Okay? Jack had always done what he'd needed to do, what was best, or at least what he thought and felt was best, and he wasn't going to stop now. That's really all anybody can do, right? Jack snatched the hair from All Might even though it was covered in blood and quickly scarfed it down. The taste was bitter and wrong on his tongue, and sadly familiar, because when you've swallowed blood before you realize the taste is very unique and could never ever be forgotten. He needed to reassure him. He needed to say something. Anything. Those were the thoughts that consumed Jack in that moment. He'd be the only one he'd ever tell. He made the decision in an instant. Even if it was doctored, he needed to tell someone, and if anyone it was going to be this man, since 1. He was giving him this power, and 2. He deserved and needed to know. Jack had to give him some peace of mind here at the end. If he could offer anything, it would be that the legacy of One for All would continue so long as Jack drew breath. I promise you all might. The emotion in Toshinori's eyes was all Jack needed to know, that he was still there with him and had heard him. I promise you, I will be the greatest hero I can be. I'll give it everything I have, and I'll do my best to save everyone with a smile, just like you. I'm gonna clench this fist, and I won't stop until I've found a 10th holder worthy of it too, I promise you. The words were said while tears leaked from his eyes. Jack swore that he had never been a crybaby, not like izukumidoriya had been in the beginning, but in that moment, seeing such a great man laid low, he couldn't help it. This man who had bled and fought and was about to die for all the things that Jack too believed to be good and right. This man who had just trusted the future of the quirk One for All to him, a nobody, a total stranger, knowing that if he didn't it would be gone forever. Toshinori gasped, whether it was from the pain or in recognition of what Jack had parroted that Nana Shimura had said to him years ago. Jack would never know. But the moment after that, All Might did the only thing he had ever done better than saving another person's life. He smiled. Jack watched him close his eyes, and then he watched as the man's chest fell for the last time. All the while the tears kept coming as they streamed down his face. Jack stayed like that for who knows how long, but when he finally came back to himself, it dawned on him. Had anyone seen that? Were there people around? He needed answers, and fast. More importantly, he had to get out of here before somebody pinned a murder on him, or worse, started asking questions that he couldn't answer. But he couldn't just leave All Might, could he? Jack placed Toshinori Yagi's hand back on his chest for the last time, and then said a prayer to anyone or anything who would listen to take care of him, to make sure that he got to see Nana Shimura again. And then he quickly stood up and started to jog toward the boardwalk, looking to see if anyone had been around or could have seen what transpired, hoping to all that not a soul had noticed. It was about 5 feet from the stairs that lead up to the boardwalk when it happened, that Jack would forever after swear he had heard a whisper. Thank you. Jack quickly spun around to address what sounded like someone standing right next to him saying the words, but then paused when he saw it. More specifically, her. There was no more body. The lights from all around were illuminating the beach far out enough that even though it was a way up, Jack could still see everything clearly, and yet when he looked back for All Might's body, the blood, there was nothing there that could have told you that someone had died on that beach. But there was something, more specifically, someone standing right where All Might's body had been. It happened in a flash, and he swore that he was seeing things, but he knew that she had been there even though when he blinked she was gone. If Jack was to be completely honest about it, the encounter had him terrified. Death. Jack knew what she looked like. She was honestly one of the most beautiful women he'd ever seen on paper, and after the glimpse, if it was real, he now knew it to be true. Her skin could almost be called whiter than milk, if such a thing were possible. She'd been completely flawless, long raven black locks of hair traveling past her shoulders, eyes of shining obsidian, and a smile so pure that even though she was wearing black lipstick when her lips peeled back to show her immaculate white teeth, he felt weak in the knees. The Sandman comic had been an awesome read and had depicted her. A walking, talking, primordial force, dressed in plain black clothes, wearing an ankh, holding an umbrella. A reaper with a kind heart, if you could believe such a thing was possible. He'd only found out about it because of him liking Constantine and stuff like it. But if he was really here, and that had just really happened. Oh boy, Jack thought. It was too much. The thoughts once again rushed upon him. The world teetered off its axis. And all Jackson Allen saw for a time afterward was blackness. You seem to have given him quite the scare there, young lady. A now whole but transparent All Might said as he gazed at the form of his successor on the beach. Hee. Oh, I think he'll be just fine. Someone will be along to collect him in a moment actually. I can't just come and go like that without attracting a certain amount of attention after all. That being said, I made sure it was someone of the good variety. The primordial force's eyes were keenly trained on the now ninth holder as she spoke. He knew me, you know, knew things that I can't believe he knew. I'm not sure how, but I can tell you that his eyes were very old. Like he'd seen half a life already and was weighed down by it. But still, they were such kind eyes, I just knew that I could trust him. The grief could be felt rolling off of the fallen hero as he said it. The turmoil of his soul laid bare for leaving the next holder of One for All with no guidance. Yes, I'm sorry to say that there's a greater game afoot in this timeline in this universe. It was the reason for your meeting him actually. For either one of you even being here. I can't say much more because spoilers aren't appreciated. But I can tell you he is going to be a wonderful hero. There was really only one other choice, and if it brings you any comfort, you've already made that choice before Toshinori. The girl said with a smile up to the taller man. This is all very confusing. All Might said as he rubbed the back of his head. I imagine so. Please just know that in this particular instance, these events as they've happened, and he as the ninth bearer are necessary. This bit was said as if from a teacher to student, while the primordial turned away from the now unconscious boy towards the ocean. It's a hero's job to look out for the greater well-being of the world. I can only hope he will be a symbol of peace like I was. All Might said as he turned in the same direction as Death. You needn't worry about that, All Might. Hey, he'll do right by you and the other holders before you. I'd love to chat some more, but it really is time to go. Are you ready? She said as she began to walk toward the water, twirling her umbrella. Honestly, no, but I don't seem to have a choice in the matter. According to you, my work is well and truly done. I just hope that he is all right with everything. The hero turned to glance at his unconscious successor and then back to the now unknown before him, filled with a sense of dread. No need for fear, Toshinori. That man died during your battle. I took him to where he belongs already, and he will be getting a chance to try again as someone else and in a different place now. I imagine he'd hate me if he could remember it, that is. Oh well then, I guess that is my fate as well then, huh? All Might half asked, half stated with a bit of dejection. Of course not, silly. You've earned your rest many times over already, Toshinori Yagi. I believe that a certain someone is waiting to see you again and to congratulate you too. We probably shouldn't keep her waiting. Death's shoulders were shaking from the giggles as she peered at the hero. Yes, you're right, of course, Lady Death. I'm looking forward to seeing my master again. Goodbye, young Jack, and good luck were All Might's last thoughts before following Death toward a now open portal to the hereafter. Come along now, Toshinori, I'm late, quite late for an important date. Death stated as she walked slowly towards the portal. Death peered over her shoulder one last time at the brown-haired, brown-eyed boy who had been a man just shortly earlier from another universe, now slowly growing a power from an even farther universe altogether inside of himself. She could only adopt a small sad smile as she and one of the greatest heroes the multiverse had ever seen began to fade into the hereafter. Be safe, Jack, and be strong. Your family will be watching over you, even if you can't see them. You can't even begin to imagine how proud of you they are. I know I am. With that final thought, Death and All Might, the symbol of peace, disappeared. Within moments of Death and All Might's departure, a man appearing to be in his 40s in a tan trench coat and fedora combo, wearing dark pants and brown wing tips, came down the pier and proceeded to walk down the steps and came upon Jack's unmoving body. He quickly flipped the boy onto his back and checked for a pulse. Having found one, he then moved on to a completely different methodology of inspection by taking a strange talisman out of his right coat pocket and used it to scan the young boy laying before him. Having found no spiritual irregularities, but having discovered the small growth of power within the boy, the stranger made the only choice he felt logical at that time. Well, it would seem you have quite the story to tell, don't you, my boy? I guess we'll have to see what you have to say for yourself when you wake. Must be pretty important for one of the Endless to be getting themselves involved. The stranger said as he placed one hand on the unconscious boy's chest after putting his amulet away. Ikatsuot Edifice. The two were quickly consumed by a shimmering golden light, and just as quickly faded as though they had never been there at all. Meanwhile, the few people who had been walking along the quiet boardwalk at the wee hours of the morning continued about their comings and goings, having never noticed any of what had happened that morning at all. Atlantic City, September 5th, 11:45 EST. As consciousness returned, Jack knew that something was off. He was no longer in any pain, had no more discomfort, and was decidedly warm. He most definitely wasn't laying on a couch the last he had checked. The fact that he had become a sort of light sleeper was finally coming in handy, since he was now subtly trying to get a look at where he now was. The place was blurry from the obvious sleep in his eyes that he obviously wanted to wipe, but did not want to draw any kind of attention to himself at this moment. Where am I? That and 1,000 other questions again were flooding his brain, just like last night. The fact that he was able to remain this calm would actually seem disturbing to some. But Jack had learned to try and adapt early on in life. His dad Flint had been a single parent due to having to kick Jack's mother Lynn out for being a drug addict. And at the age of 8 Jack had to grow up faster to help raise his sister Hazel. Life was quite accelerated after that. At 11 Jack had his first job working around his neighborhood doing seasonal lawn work for anybody in the neighborhood that needed it. Some would say that helping pay bills and raising a kid at that age was too much, and in some respects they were right. But Jack had developed a rebellious streak too and got up to all kinds of trouble as well, but also knew his dad could never know about any kind of shenanigans lest he face the man's wrath, so he kept the fights and everything else under wraps. You say what you want, but some kids learn to fear their parents' reprisal, even if it doesn't lead to a beating. Between having to develop business acumen, maternal instincts, all the typical crap that is growing up and learning to have a sense of pride in hard work, Jack had picked up some interesting skills. His martial arts teacher had instilled a very simple code: hit hard, hit fast, and hit first. So Jack picked up the habit of fighting a little dirty. And what sue him, it's not like every shithead on the street was gonna fight fair either, considering he'd been taught where and how to hit somebody. He'd also picked up some of the rather more dare-wee illegal skills while spending time with friends that had a more street-oriented lifestyle, like pickpocketing, lock-picking, and a little bit of parkour. Though being honest, the parkour was only enough to jump off a roof or over a fence without getting hurt. Sometimes an honest day's labor just didn't put enough on the table, and that was a fact. Though one of the better skills he picked up was essentially not a skill at all. It was actually the closest thing he ever really considered possible to having a superpower in the real world. After having been in enough fights on the street, or in the gym, mounting on top of the times during his youth, he was having to actually run from people that is cops, too many punks to fight at once, and even the occasional nasty dog. Jack had developed what he swore up and down was the poor man's spider sense. Yeah. Not the best name, but the results were good. He couldn't even count the times that it had saved his life. The uncanny ability to not only feel out danger and know whether or not it was directed at you, but with it the ability to feel whether you're in a room alone or not and where that person may be. And it just so happened to be helping him now because he could most definitely tell he was being watched, and the perpetrator was only within a couple feet of him. Hoping beyond hope that last night had been nothing but a sugar-induced dream and that he had slept, walked his ass downstairs, and fully expecting either his son or the dog to jump at him, Jack quickly sat up and threw out his arms, shouting at the top of his lungs. Boo. Yeah, he felt like a cheese ball, but what else was he gonna do? It took only a second after quickly wiping the sleep from his eyes to know. He was not in his house. He was most definitely wearing the clothes from what he had hoped was just a ridiculous dream. He didn't sound like himself, and he was definitely not alone. Jack found himself sitting on a matte brown couch with a light blue blanket draped across his lap, while trying to take in the room around him quickly. Light beige walls, hardwood floor, long brown coffee table right in front of me, random bookcases and knick-knack cabinets scattered throughout filled with who knows what. A small nook that looked to be a kitchen, a hallway with what looked like 3 doors, and of course the most important part, the man sitting in a fold-out chair right in front of the coffee table in front of him. Jack could say that he looked pretty close to Michael Fassbender if he had just been a little older looking in the face and had slightly graying hair or the side of his head. He was wearing a white button-up shirt with an almost blood-red tie, and dark brown pants with dark-colored dress shoes on his feet. The fold-out chair he was sitting on had a tan trench coat draped around it, while a tan fedora was sitting on the coffee table next to a gray ashtray, while a small cup filled with what looked to be black coffee sat wafting steam into the air right next to it. The man's face looked passive, but Jack had seen the same look in plenty of people's eyes before. The man was measuring him. He was probably waiting for Jack to say something, anything. "So you're the one from another universe, eh? Okay, well there goes that theory. And did he just say what he thought he said? So we're just diving right in, huh? Well, that certainly makes things infinitely easier, and yet oh so more complicated." It was all real, all might, feeling younger, taking on one for all of it. He could feel his heart rate picking up, but took a quick deep breath and affixed his most professional scowl on his face. Now was not the time to show weakness and be a little beach. If this guy, whoever he was, had meant any harm, he could have done it already, which means he must be at least willing to try and civilly figure it out. Besides, if not, he could always just jump the table and attempt his first 100% smash, see how the dude liked that. Funny thing was though, Jack got the feeling this guy wasn't so bad, and even though you know what they say about assuming, Jack decided to take a tentative first step. "How do you know about all that?" he asked while taking the best measure he could of the older man sitting across from him while trying to subtly prepare to go to war if it was going to come to that. The eyebrow raise he received after his own question was definitely slightly patronizing, but I mean in hindsight it could have been expected after what came next. "I know because I tend to dabble in the mystic arts, my young friend, and where I found you was saturated in mystical energy. A very specific kind of energy, and once I felt it and the call it was putting out, I followed it to find what? You. No, you do not simply wander into the kind of feelings I got last night and find a simple young man." Jack was starting to sweat a little. None of this was making any sense. This stuff had to be a dream, but for the life of him he could not wake up, no matter how hard he tried. "I can assure you, kiddo, that this is no dream. You're really in the here and now, and it's not going to change anytime soon. So how about you try telling me what you do know so that I can try to help you, The question was phrased kindly enough, and the man hadn't moved much at all, but Jack still felt overwhelmed by all of this. But truth be told, Jack had told plenty of lies in life before and harbored more than his fair share of secrets, and not just for himself, mind you. And what he'd learned from all of that is that it wasn't healthy. And after plenty of mistakes in adult life, he came to the very simple conclusion that his dad had been right when he said, "Lying only makes things worse. Just get the truth out from the get-go and take the rest as it comes." And with that, "Well, sir, my name." Wait just a moment. Before we begin, while I appreciate the manners, don't call me sir. Makes me feel far too old, even though it is true. You can call me Richard, okay? Let's keep this as light as we can until I feel it's necessary to change the tone. He said it in a kind voice and had made a slight waving gesture with his right hand to let Jack know to go on. This all felt like it was going way too smooth, but you know what they say about looking a gift horse in the mouth. "Okay? Well, my name is Jackson Allen. As hard as it might be to believe, before I found myself on the beach, where I know you obviously found me from, I was at home and probably about 15 or so years older and married with a kid, and now, here we are." Cue shoulder shrug. The look on Richard's face was actually priceless, and drew a small chuckle out of Jack before his look shifted to something a little more quizzical instead of incredulous. He moved slowly, and if Jack had to choose a word, carefully was the best descriptor for Richard's movements as he rose from his seat and slowly stepped around the coffee table. "I would like to do something if you don't mind, and I give you my solemn vow that no harm will befall you. I would simply like to make this process a tad bit easier on the both of us and cut out the need for any kind of long-winded drivel if you don't mind." This question was said in a very bland, matter-of-fact tone. And quite frankly, if all this was real, this Richard could have very likely saved Jack's life. Falling out in random places seldom turns out to anyone's advantage. All Jack could give was a brief nod, and then Richard did something that shocked and amazed him all at the same time. He raised both hands at him, and then he witnessed a golden glow coming from the guy's hands. Woes em simit snam ceramum. It was a very strange feeling. If Jack could describe it, the feeling was like having brain freeze, and yet almost like he had water passing over and around his brain while it was still inside his skull. Wait, like brainwashing? God, he hoped not. Richard kept his hands in place for what Jack had to guess was about 2 minutes. When the glow finally faded and he lowered his hands, the look on Richard's face was actually surprising to Jack. The man's eyes reflected a level of sadness that Jack was very familiar with since he had felt it multiple times after losing a very important person in his life, and there had been more than a few. Jack hoped there was no pity in his eyes, but had a very strange feeling that he would be running into that look a lot if people started digging into who he was and how he came to be wherever he was. I am sorry that you have been ripped from all you know. I can only imagine how that feels, and the fact of the loss you have had to endure over the past year on top of that. You are very resilient. I can try to get you back to your home if you wish, though I must be honest with you. Whatever the force is that brought you here, it is powerful. I have very rarely felt the kind of energy that is wafting about you. But I can tell you now confidently that whatever it is that brought you and the other man here that gave you that impressive power that is now growing inside you is truly beyond normal mystical comprehension, even for someone like me. Of course, the follow-up to that was Jack immediately jumping at the request for Richard to get him home if he could. Why would he ever turn that down? Who could possibly turn something like that down? But then his promise to All Might came slamming to the forefront of his mind. And not to mention, let's not forget the fact that he now looks like he should be on an after-school special. Most importantly right now, could he break his word that he had made to a now dead man? The direct and obvious answer would be he wouldn't have to. Not really. His Earth was definitely in turmoil, and really what Earth wouldn't be? As long as there were people, there would always be some kind of strife, because while there was always good, the same could be said of evil. Jack knew that if he could get home and keep it quiet until he could use at least 20% or more of one for all, he could make a huge difference. He'd be able to save people and set an example. I mean, who wouldn't with the kind of power that was even now crackling beneath his skin? He had already tried to tentatively get a hold of it, and if the buzz that he got from just trying to focus on it was anything, woo mama. Richard had been toiling about his apartment while Jack was having his introspection, opening cabinets, taking a large copper bowl out, pouring miscellaneous ingredients that Jack couldn't even imagine what they were for, and that's when he started to chant in a language Jack couldn't possibly understand and would tell you immediately that he'd never heard before. This carried on for about 5 minutes according to the grandfather clock next to the nearest right wall of the couch, and at the end a subtle glow faded off and through the apartment. And then the level of light went back to what it was, and the two sat in silence. So, I am sorry, but I honestly can't find your home. The level of energy I just expended was over 3/4 of my total pool of magic, no easy feat if I'm being honest. And it literally felt as though I was fumbling around in a pitch-black room, looking for a wall to touch only to realize that I was nowhere near a surface at all. Jack would have liked to say that he didn't immediately feel like his life was over. But come on, if you just got told that you'd really lost your family, nay your entire life and world, what else can you feel? His wife, the only woman he'd ever really been with. His son, who wasn't even a teenager yet, and now he wouldn't see them again. Worst of all, he was younger now. How old was he really? Even if he did find a way back, what did that mean for him and his family? How does he deal with this? Can he even find his way home? Where the hell even is here? Again, all the questions began to swirl around in Jack's head, and all he could muster to think was that he just needed some air before his head popped off. Surprisingly, he felt his feelings become muted, and the pain wasn't so bad anymore. That is, of course, when he looked up and realized that Richard was pointing at him and his hand was slightly glowing again. I'm very sorry, I feel like a terrible host. As it is, this is now about the 4th spell I've placed on you without your permission. If only we had been under different circumstances, I wouldn't have done such a thing. I need you to understand that you are in no danger. The spells were more to make sure no one could track you to here and now. And that you wouldn't be a danger to me, of course one can never be too careful. If you're beginning to wonder what I mean by that, it is quite simple. You haven't really been able to ask any questions, and it is one of the spells I cast because I wanted to get the measure of you without a great deal of back and forth, which can lead to omission or outright lies. Allow me to be completely honest with you in return, with this being the first small piece of information, which I will then remove the initial block I placed on you in your sleep so we can have a better repartee. Henceforth, before we go any further, allow me to formally introduce myself. I am Richard Occult, or better known by my title Dr. Occult. As soon as those words processed in his head, Jack realized one very simple fact. This was insane. This was bad. Jack was officially in the DC universe where villains and heroes were commonplace, where magic and technology and mayhem were everywhere, and where the end of the universe could be right around the nearest corner, and if you were a simple nobody you'd never even know it. Jack had read about the man before him, though very vaguely. Dr. Occult was a mystical detective and one of the Sentinels of Magic, a very important order that helped safeguard the world from mystical problems. He had teamed with the likes of the JSA and one of Jack's favorite heroes, John Constantine, to take down horrible foes. Jack was interrupted from any more fanboy-like thoughts on the matter when Occult cleared his throat with a cough. I must say, to find out that you know of me as a comic book character made for the purpose of entertainment is slightly insulting and worrying, though not the most outlandish thing ever. Consider the counter-argument. A singular universe is vast, and even with my knowledge and experience in the mystic arts, I myself am still sometimes left in awe of what possibilities stretch out before us. The further knowledge of understanding that there are an infinite number of universes makes it far easier for someone to understand. Though I would be remiss if I did not tell you here and now to keep that secret to yourself for the obvious reasons I'm sure you're already aware of and considering. If you would like, I can cast a spell on you that will, in the form of a tattoo, effectively protect you from mental attacks to keep your mind and information, especially what should be considered extremely dangerous information you seem to know, hidden. It's not every day someone is walking around with the identities of the superhero community. Rest assured, I am very real. All of this is, and you are very much on a different Earth, though which one in relation to yours I cannot say. After sifting through your memories, it is clear that you too will be a part of, and if I'm not mistaken, a very large part of the future of this world. With the power you have inherited, it will be quite easy for you to become a talking point for this Earth, whether it be for ill or for good, if you are planning on involving yourself in the larger world, and by that I mean the world of, as you would call it, heroes and villains. Occult said as he retook his seat in the fold-out chair. Normally Jack would have no problem answering any of this, if even only because he had given All Might his word to do so before taking on one, for although the fact remained he had a long road ahead if he was going to even consider it, and he still so many unanswered questions. There is no need to be concerned if that is why you're so deep in thought. I personally will tell no one if that is the way you would like to go about. All could also simply adopt a mundane life while I look for a way home for you if that is what you desire. When you are comfortable, let me know what you wish to do, the paranormal detective said before he began to sip his coffee. Jack was starting to spiral, so he did the only thing he could think of, and proceeded to once again do something that he was sure Midoriya would do, the mumble storm. Are you sure you can't get me home? Why am I younger now? How long will I live, considering I was 30 just last night in another universe, even if you can send me back home? Will I be stuck like this? Can my body handle one for all at all, considering I'm from a world that is completely different than All Might's? What can I do for this world with no funds or connections? Jack's mouth started to run so fast that it was honestly impressive from Occult's point of view. Though just as he was about to intercede, the boy who had once been a man stopped him in his tracks with his last out-loud question, though it seemed like it was more directed at himself than him. Do I really want to even be a hero? Isn't it enough that I just basically lost my entire life? Why would anybody pick somebody like me who had everything to lose? For once Occult felt quite tired. Contrary to what many who knew Occult thought, having a slowed aging process was not always a boon, especially when it came to dealing with tragedy. He had dealt with many over his life. Richard had even dealt with losing his lover before, at least in a sense. But what had happened to the young man before him was something he knew only a few individuals could even come close to understanding, and none at the age that he had been, only to be rewound and allowed to remember it all and be separated from all that was known. Placing his coffee mug down, Occult again slowly raised from his chair and approached the sofa carefully. He sat to the boy's left and placed a hand on his shoulder to give it the tiniest of squeezes. I know that I don't know you personally, but I have seen your life. In full regale, might I add. You are a good young man, and you have a kind heart. You have many conflicting ideologies when it comes to heroism, but you know that above all, keeping the innocent safe is the most important thing there is. You love your family, and I will do my utmost to continue looking for a way for you to go home, this I vow to you. But in the meantime you do need to decide what you will do with yourself. You know that I can't make that decision for you. I will aid you no matter the life you choose to live, but I think you must ask yourself this before you truly decide what you'll do. What is your heart telling you to do? Ault asked before rising to walk into the kitchen from his seat to give Jack some time to make up his mind. What is my heart telling me? What a load of crap, Jack thought as he stared at the man walking away from him, wanting to throw something at his back. He wanted to scream, rant, and rage, something just to get it all out. In the end, he did the quickest one. The one he swore he wouldn't again. He started to cry again. He would only think on it briefly later that he'd been doing that a lot lately, but at the moment it had happened again and the dam had burst. He kept going over it in his mind again and again. His life had not been easy before, nor was it now, but it was his. He had felt pain, but it certainly had never felt this bad even at the worst of times. It dawned on him that this was what true despair felt like. And as cheesy as it was for Jack, the memory that would help him make his decision and pull himself out of his mood was one that could be considered one of the best. Flashback. Perth Amboy NJ. 13:35 EST. It was wonderful to be around family, even as crazy as Jack's was. Seeing his mom was decidedly rare these days, and truth be told he liked it that way. He was older now and understood that his mom was in fact sick. Addiction kills, it ruins lives, and the fact is until you walk a mile in those shoes, you could never know for yourself. Today was actually one of the better days, because his mom was coherent and doting on his son. Life had been rough without her around, and Jack had to take on a lot of responsibility that many had said he shouldn't have had to and that he hadn't been ready for it. But in the end he knew he was stronger because of it. Obviously, it took years for him to get to that point, but the major takeaway being that he had forgiven his mom and he accepted her. Now with a better understanding that she did love him and his sister very much and hadn't walked away from them. She simply had too many problems to try to be able to show it in what was considered a normal way. But he had plenty of good memories of her, and he was about to be given another one. Sitting on the couch in his aunt's spacious living room, holding her grandson in her lap, she looked over at Jack coming into the room. "You know your daddy's pretty great, isn't he?" she asked as she held and tickled the little boy. The quick response was the same as always. "Yeah, Nana, Dad's my hero." The smile that lit her face showed all her teeth, and when she met Jack's eyes, he felt all the love he'd ever needed and wanted from her. "Yeah, your daddy's my hero too, and why wouldn't he be? He's my special boy, just like you're his." Jack smiled at them and asked if either of them wanted a drink to give himself an excuse so that he could walk away to hide his tears. He knew deep down that he shouldn't be ashamed of them, but at the same time he kind of wanted to be selfish and enjoy some of the few happy tears he'd ever had. End flashback. The memory faded as did the tears, but his smile remained. He knew what he wanted to do, and he knew how he wanted to go about it too. He was going to pick himself up and fight. He always tried and always fought, and he wasn't going to stop now. It was going to take a lot of time and a lot of perseverance, but he'd get it done. He wanted to go home, and he would hold Ault to his word and look for ways on his own when he was competent. After all, Ault isn't the only mystic in the DC universe, and if not a mystic, then somebody with tech could help him figure out a way home. He got up slowly from the couch and walked to the kitchen island to find Ault cutting up some fruit. The smile ever present, he started. "I want to be a hero. Can you cast the spell so my mind and all its secrets stay my own? Can you help me find somebody to help me train? And most importantly, can I count on you as an ally from here on out?" Ault looked up from his cutting for a brief moment and then began again while talking to the boy with a small smile on his face. "I will do what I can to aid you, though I must be honest, my resources are somewhat limited. Though helping find someone to train you shouldn't be too difficult. In fact, I know of a few that can be of service in this manner. I must say it's unfortunate that you have so little affinity for the mystic arts. If you were just a bit stronger, I'd take you as a student in earnest. That being said, I can teach you some things as you aren't completely outside of the spectrum of using magic. Though I think you're looking for something a little more physical," Ault said as he took his knife to the sink and then started to wash and then dry his hands. "As for the protection, simply tell me where you would like the tattoo and what you would like it to be, and I shall place the spell." The answer was quick and concise. "I want a blue Hamza hand, and I'd like it on my right shoulder blade." Occult smirked at the answer and knew immediately why he had chosen it, though he wouldn't speak of it out. Leading Jack back into the living room, Occult had him straddle the folding chair with his chest to the back of it so that he could place his hand over his shoulder blade, and then proceeded to recite an incantation. "Asma yal roy dinan napu sit yab, ti sirop sidinim dianaluos morph edistuo sekrof." Once the chant ended, Jack could feel a mild burn, as though he had gotten a sunburn on his back, though it only felt about the size of his palm. "I am impressed that you thought to use that symbol in the first place. It will protect you greatly, as that is what it is meant to do. It not only has the added benefit of being a symbol representing what you were looking for, therefore enhancing its base properties, but the place you chose will make it almost impossible to detect, and even on the slim chance that another mystic saw it, they would dismiss it as a simple tattoo unless standing directly on top of you," Occult said as he gave a once-over of his work and patted Jack on the shoulder to let him know he was done. Jack stood up and placed his shirt back on and proceeded to follow Occult back to the island to eat some fruit, where they then began to discuss Jack's next steps in the world. "So, who can you take me to for training? Because if I'm being honest, I already have the beginning direction to go with my power, I just need to work on my body." As he said this, he clenched his right fist, and Richard could have sworn that he saw a few light bluish-green sparks dancing on Jack's knuckles. "Well, I already know the answer to the question I'm going to ask you, but I can't wait to see the look on your face. Does the name Ted Grant ring any bells to you?" Jack's answer was for his smile to shift into a smirk. Gotham City. September 6, 8:40 EST. Jack could say that he had always imagined going to Gotham City in his daydreams. He had always been a huge fan of Batman growing up and even into his adulthood, even if he didn't always agree with the way the Dark Knight dealt with the crime that ravaged his home. Jack had seen plenty of iterations of Gotham through comics, animated movies, and all other sorts of media. Standing here now in the fabled city of the Dark Knight, he could honestly say that it was a lot cleaner than he thought it would be, and surprisingly brighter, though that was to be expected considering it was early in the morning and the sun was starting to rise higher over the city skyline. Most representations of Gotham depicted a dark, dreary, relatively dirty place that looked ravaged by time, neglect, and crime alike, while looking like it had stepped out of a Gothic Roman painting. The fact of it was, though, it looked like New York City did in a way, but just a smidge older looking and still different, like a 80s-90s action movie representation of New York with a few newer and more modernized looking buildings. Jack could honestly say now, standing outside of the clean-looking Grant's Gym located on the dreaded south side of Gotham, he found that had to re-evaluate his understanding of Gotham City as far as aesthetics was concerned. The red brick setting of most of the buildings down this way was very uniform, and all things considered painted a very put-together looking place. Having spent the majority of his birthday with Occult, just trying to get re-antiquated with being in his younger body was an experience for Jack. After talking with Occult at length about his condition and the possibilities of what it could mean as far as his survivability in this new world went, that really only left beginning training his body back up and figuring out his cover for his new life here for however long he would need it. Flashback. Atlantic City. September 5, 14:30 EST. Occult had done a thorough scan of Jack while he had been unconscious, and as far as the sorcerer could tell, Jack would live a long and natural human life if he stayed healthy, which Jack took as a humongous comfort after Occult had told him. That news boded well for his now probable future as a hero. Though many questions were still up in the air, Occult quickly assured him that Ted Grant would be more than happy to help him. Whether or not that was true would be put to the test. Jack had read about Ted Grant and watched a few iterations of him through DC animated cartoons. Considering the possibilities of what he figured he himself knew about Ted, he wasn't going to get his hopes up, if only for the sake of either sparing himself the feeling of being in the man's debt or avoiding any kind of awkwardness that could waft around from time to time. Quite frankly, there was a lot of potential for both to be a possibility. Ted Grant was a larger-than-life kind of guy, looking like a slightly aged bodybuilder, but without any ravages of time really showing on his person. Grant had been a boxer, a superhero, and quite frankly many other things like any other person tended to be throughout life. The comics depicted him as a masterful hand-to-hand combatant, having even gone on to train many great heroes that Ault had already confirmed were currently active today, like Black Canary, Superman, and of course Batman. Ted's history in this iteration of a DC timeline was still rather unknown to Jack, as Ault had expressly stated that any questions he had would have to be vetted through Ted himself. If Jackson was being honest, that was one of the things he was not looking forward to when it came to meeting Wildcat. The comics that he had read had been few in regards to Wildcat's screen time, and the wiki had claimed that he, much like most heroes, had a past coated with the brush of tragedy. Ted had had 2 sons, and whether or not that was the case here had yet to be seen, and if so, one of them may or may not be dead thanks to the interference of a villain. Things could only be even more complicated after that. Another thing to mention was the fact that Wildcat had possibly had known relations with Catwoman again, whether it had happened or not here notwithstanding, not only helping to train her in combat, but also at one point being a past lover of hers. All of these thoughts had swirled through Jack's head while he discussed the future with Ault as he stretched and performed basic exercises. Most would think, what is one day going to do for your physical fitness? Well, quite a bit, to be honest, as far as Jack was concerned. It wasn't anywhere near about improving his physique on this day anyway, but forming his actual base for his development, testing what his body was currently capable of. Getting used to being in a teenage body again was definitely annoying. It came with not just having to shake off the fact that his reach was now different, or his height, but all the typical issues that came with being 14. Awkward. During his youth, Jack had been flexible and quick on his feet with definite power behind his strikes, though that didn't come from an overabundance of muscle, and more so his technique. Making it to brown belt in Taekwondo, learning mild boxing from friends, and getting into a pretty ludicrous amount of street fights led to him having pretty decent form and power when it came to fighting. Jack had many times as he had gotten older found that he regretted not having hit a weight room sooner in his life. As he had pushed forward into adulthood, he knew in his own heart that he was strong for a guy his size when he was an adult, and even now that he had reverted back to being a teen, he was still strong, but definitely didn't have the size to back up what he knew one for all could output. Definition maybe, size not so much. Things had not changed, it seemed, as a lot of, if not all of his looks were the same as when he had been 14 previously. He had a slightly defined V-line, relatively decent abs, though they were the kind that a very thin and flexible person boasted, slightly defined arms which suited him just fine, and of course at 14 years old he had been around 5'7". By the time that 9th grade had concluded for Jack, he was close to 5'9". Throughout high school, Jack had almost finished his height growth, being 6'0" at 17 during graduation, and had only topped out at 6'2" after getting to around 22. Though that progression had been rough and rather slow going, leaving him honestly feeling small, even though 6'2" is nothing to sneeze at. If things continued on the trend they had been on, then at the very least Jack knew he could probably count on being just a little under 6'0" by the time he was 16 or so, which in his opinion was great. The first half an hour after getting their baseline for what they were going to do once meeting Ted consisted of Jack experimenting with one for all. Knowing his fitness level at 14 years old left Jack with pretty much limitless potential as far as he thought. The only thing he had to do now was start building. Thank you again, Ault, for figuring out the standing of my age, Jack thought as he paced around the small living room of Ault's safe house. He had been content to believe he was around 14-15, but having confirmation that he had literally just had what would be considered his 14th birthday again left him with a good line of thought for his training. He began running himself through basic stretches and then began cranking out push-ups, sit-ups, crunches, lunges, squats, and planks until he had cycled through his routine that he had started doing after joining the Guard. 6 sets of 15, a piece per exercise with only 30 seconds of rest in between got his blood flowing and heartbeat up to what he considered an acceptable level. Okay, so at least I confirmed that as a 14-year-old I was way fitter than in my 20s. That's a wonderfully self-depreciating thought. Settling down for a seat on the fold-out chair Ault had abandoned, Jack took a more noticeable look around the safe house Ault had them in, and then was struck by a very funny yet annoying train of thought. Turns out that Ault had 5 separate safe houses in places that he typically wound up running into some kind of mystical mumbo-jumbo. One being here in Jersey, just backing up all the thoughts about weird NJ rattling around made Jack chuckle a little until a particular thought hit. Limited resources my butt. Why is it that people in the hero gig always seem to have a skewed outlook on their resources? Jack thought as he glanced at the man reading the paper on the kitchen island. Normal people didn't own 5 homes, especially not safe houses. Period. The next thing Jack knew he needed to do was establish his understanding of One for All. It wouldn't do him or anybody else any good if he couldn't even use the gift All Might had given him. The first thing Jack did while Ault was checking current events was go over what he had seen from the 4 seasons of My Hero Academia he had watched, albeit the 4th season being a little fuzzy. Jack then asked Ault for a notebook to compile that knowledge and what would turn out to be his own results after testing as time went on, which Ault then merely muttered something, waved a hand, and out of one of the cabinets a blank notebook with a pen already in it flew at Jack's head. Once again, magic is awesome and yet such bullshit. Jack couldn't help but shake his head thinking about all of the things he had seen done with magic in the DC universe as he picked up the flung notebook. Some of it was obviously small scale, but then when compared to other things being so grand that to call it magic felt like a disservice, it was completely ridiculous. And yet, that's exactly what and how it was. Jack's following thoughts became interesting considering the possibilities. He began to run through scenarios in his own head of what he could do if he actually mastered One for All. Yeah, no, Izuku was pretty dope in the fight with Overhaul, even if it took eerie rewinding him to make him like that. Almost kind of reminded me of. Let it be known that not only had Jack watched that particular episode of My Hero with great interest on his own, but had also seen a few reacts videos to it and was using all the comparisons that others had drawn as well as a few thoughts of his own to try and gauge where he would stand against greater threats when his mastery of One for All came about. Many people had compared Izuku to a Super Saiyan and even Superman. Either one of those comparisons made the very thought of mastering One for All quite frankly frightening. Normal humans can't just throw a punch and change the weather. Fact. But when they can? Oh, this was so fracking cool and yet so daunting all at the same time. There was obviously no time like the present from there, so Jack began with a simple battery of tests for himself. Okay, so as stupid as it sounds even to me after having watched the damn show, I'm a microwave. Let's see how far we can go with that striving for 2% power. Yeah, that sounds good. Please don't let me burst anything. Of course, it was never was that easy. So at first Jack took a deep breath and felt for something different. Anything that could tell him One for All was even there. And that's when he felt it. Maybe it is that easy. Jack let out a small gasp as he had briefly touched the cork that was now his. It left him with the very simple question jarring his mind. How could something I just got feel like it's so natural, like it's always been there waiting for me to wake it up? Jack thought wide-eyed, feeling the power of One for All. Because that's the only thing he could equate it to, as if it were what it was like to feel yourself waking after a deep sleep, being absolutely ready for anything. Jack proceeded to take a deep horse stance and started to concentrate on the power, and immediately felt a rush of it as very small light green sparks started to barely dance around him, while the deep red veins began to show around his body before fading away again, much like he had seen them do for Midoriya. Oh wow, hell yeah, Jack thought immediately as he knew the difference was there. If he could have seen it, if he would have seen the smile that he had been giving off at that exact moment, it had been blinding. Jack had never been high, at least not off of actual drugs. The most he had ever happened was when he took 3 Advil PMs once, and that just left him really groggy, unbelievably relaxed, and quite frankly to the point of feeling like a wet noodle and being unable to really move the next morning for a little bit. The feeling couldn't be described as like being drunk either. With that came a feeling of being carefree, but that was not what he was feeling right now. This was something completely different. This was like a sugar rush. It was the only way that Jack could describe it, but he also knew in his bones that it was so much more too. He felt warm and full of energy, but at the same time he was extremely aware of his surroundings, and his body had never felt this light and yet tight all at the same time. He felt ready to spring into action, and stronger than he could ever remember feeling in his entire life. Well, you know what they say, the first step is usually the hardest, right? That thought was the prelude to him almost winding up in the wall, next to one of the cabinets as he sprung from the ground. Though at the same time, while feeling scared and stupid that he almost knocked himself out, he was absolutely amazed. There was no pain as far as he could tell, and he had just covered about 4 or so steps with just that movement alone at what he figured was 2% of one for all. He knew that it would take time to adjust his senses to moving that quickly. He just hoped that it happened fast. Jack took a few steps from the wall, measuring the flow of the energy through his body as he moved. He clenched his fist, staring at it, watching the sparks slightly dance around him as he still held onto the power. He still couldn't believe that all of this had happened, and if he was being honest, he was glad for the distraction that trying to figure out his new power was bringing him. Though soon enough another short lull came after that thought and put him back at square one. The fact of the matter was, he missed his family. He missed his wife, his son, their dog Hercules, his dad, his sister, the list went on. Jack still had a myriad of questions dancing along his brain, and when he wasn't doing something even remotely engaging, his thoughts would attempt to drift into despair. What do they think happened to me? Do they think I abandoned them? Did they spontaneously find me lying in bed dead and now they're mourning me? Am I even in the same time stream? Is time dilated here, or has time flown by while I've been gone? Are they safe? Do they miss me? All of these questions and more kept trying to play on a continuous loop in Jack's mind as he thought about his new circumstances and the ones he'd left behind. Quickly snapping himself out of his inner turmoil again, he started to run through boxing drills, forms from Taekwondo, and 8-point contact fighting drills from Muay Thai, trying to keep himself occupied, and at the same time adapt to his new speed and strength that he could feel flowing beneath and through his skin as he accessed One for All. He would find his way back to them, but to do that he was going to have to stand toe-to-toe with pretty much literal gods and monsters to get the chance, and that wasn't going to happen if he didn't work on being able to master this power. He just hoped that he'd be able to measure up to the heavier threats that existed out in this universe, because quite frankly they were numerous, and he still had no idea how to handle any of this. While it has been interesting to watch you put yourself through your paces, I believe it's time we make our plans for what we will be doing next, Ault said as he made his way over from the kitchen island and proceeded to sit on the couch. Outside of giving you the tattoo, I would feel remiss if I didn't give you something for your birthday. After all, it's not every day our young man turns 14, right? Ault asked with a slight smile on his face while Jack winded down from his latest drill. He did not just make that reference, Jack thought as he threw an amused eyebrow up while side-eyeing Ault. Ault began to chuckle, seeing the look the young man was giving him. I know that there are many things you are concerned about, the first and foremost being your identity here in this world. I have a few contacts that operate on the more questionable side of the law. Regardless of them being of a seedier disposition, we will need their help to procure you a functioning identity. No need to worry yourself, it will be nigh untraceable and 100% authentic. I don't know if this has passed your mind yet, so I would like to bring this up to you now, and hopefully it doesn't cause you too much turmoil. If anything, I feel that this would be a bit of an uplifting piece of news. Using a spell and a bit of your hair, I have found that you actually have no relatives of any kind on this earth. Effectively, you are the first and only of your family living here on this world. Hence the reason for me saying that it should be uplifting, as you have no chance of someone having an identity parallel to yours. As for another piece of something you might have been concerned about, I took the liberty while first perusing your memories. I have an idea as to how to help you in developing a suit for you to wear when you begin your heroic career, and this is the bigger part of the gift I would like to give you. I will help you draft the plans, and then I will have another contact help me produce the suit and some very particular support gear. In fact, I should be able to have the support gear made fairly quickly so you can begin practicing using it. Jack's thoughts had been a whirlwind until Ault had mentioned his potential uniform, and that brought everything to a grinding halt. He immediately started listing things in his head that he wanted and didn't want for his hero uniform. Jack knew for a fact that he didn't want a skin-tight suit like All Might. He wanted to somehow pay homage to Izuku as well, though he definitely wanted to have the color scheme like All Might's or Captain. Like lightning it hit him and brought another bright smile to his face. I know exactly what I want, and I understand that you probably already knew some of this, but we're gonna write all this down so that we get it perfect. Excellent. Well, I dare say we start getting ready to settle in for the evening because first thing tomorrow I'll be taking us to see Ted. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 2. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author SojiroxTenken on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.